Good morning, everyone. I am Heather Herring, the Education Manager of NRRA, and I want to warmly welcome you to the first week of our summer webinar series, as it is the first week of summer. This morning, we will hear about optimizing our recycling education and outreach efforts. Next slide, please. Do you need professional credits? You will receive 1 hour of credit for New Hampshire operators from New Hampshire DES for viewing this webinar, or a certificate of attendance through NRRA. Webinars are being recorded and made available for those who registered. You can complete the survey at the end and connect with NRRA. It is required to receive certification completing the survey in order to get that. Continue your learning with webinars all summer long and visit our brand new website at nrrarecycles.org. Next slide, please. For our recycling facility operators, we have 10 webinars throughout the summer to choose from and learn. You can register online. Next slide, please. For our educators, administrators, and community members, we have 11 webinars to share. And although I list these on two different slides, all webinars are open to all. Next slide, please. Thanks. I wanted to set the table for GoToWebinar. You will not be able to be heard by the presenters or other participants on GoToWebinar, but Erin can unmute. If you cannot hear the presenters, click on the audio, the triangle next to audio, and select computer audio. If that does not work, try clicking on the phone audio and follow the directions from there. We hope that you ask questions and the presenters will answer them if time allows. Click on the questions and keep the questions short. Next slide, please. Here is a bit about the Northeast Resource Recycling Association. We are a recycling nonprofit with over 400 members, primarily municipalities, and we were founded nearly 40 years ago. Next slide. So what do? We do cooperative marketing and purchasing. We enable communities to manage their own recycling programs. We have over 40 programs, including single stream and municipal solid waste. And we connect sellers of recyclables to purchasers. Next slide. We also offer education and technical assistance through workshops, facility tours of recycling facility, annual conference. This is an unusual year, but we're making our annual conference into summer webinars. We offer tons of technical assistance, and we have school club programs. Next slide. All right, now I would like to introduce our presenter of optimizing our recycling education outreach efforts, Erin Victor. She is an environmental analyst from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. I'm handing the presentation over to you, Erin. Thank you. Just make sure you unmute your microphone.
Great, thank you so much, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone. As Heather said, my name is Erin Victor, and I am at Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, where I lead our statewide recycling education campaign, Recycle Smart MA. And I appreciate you all taking the time to join us here today to learn about optimizing our recycling education and outreach efforts. I'll be sharing with you what we've learned here at Mass DEP from working with marketing professionals, diving into the behavior change science, and our own marketing research and good old trial and error. So let's dive in. Does this look familiar? Whether it's letting people know about your upcoming household hazardous waste event, what does and doesn't belong in the recycling bin, or a change in your operational hours at the recycling drop-off center or a curbside pickup schedule, the bottom line is that you need to get people's attention. We are living in what they have now dubbed the attention economy, where companies across the world have figured out that our attention is most valuable commodity. This means that organizations are spending millions of dollars trying to capture our attention. I'm going to make the assumption that you are in the same boat as our team here at Mass DEP and don't have millions of dollars to spend on your recycling education and outreach efforts. So how do we break through the noise? Well, I have good news for you. While we may be no match for Kim Kardashian, who is known for breaking the internet, the Recycle Smart MA team has learned a thing or two about getting people's attention, and even more importantly, using that attention in order to motivate behavior change. Since we launched the campaign in the fall of 2018, we've grown a pretty sizable following of smart recyclers, in part thanks to that furry friend Rio that you just saw. So here's where we're going today. I'll start with a quick overview about Recycle Smart and what it is, and then I'll jump into the tips and tricks that we've learned throughout the journey. My goal at the end of this lunch power hour is that you will leave feeling empowered with a few new tools in your toolbox to take back with you and implement in your own community. At the end, I'll open up for any questions that you may have and ask you to share out your own experiences if we have time about what recycling education outreach efforts that you have implemented in your community, what worked, what didn't work, and what you're excited about putting into practice. But first, let's get a better picture of who is joining us today. I'm going to launch a poll. Oh, it looks like, Heather, because we practiced this poll, it is not going to let me launch it. So we are going to skip the poll for now. Essentially, I was going to ask you where you are located and what type of recycling program you have in your community. But we actually know some of that information already, and if you are interested, we can share that out. But we do have people from multiple different states, New Hampshire and Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, and Connecticut here. So everyone has different types of recycling programs, and we are excited to have you all here. So for those of you that may be new to Recycle Smart, in a nutshell, Recycle Smart is a statewide educational initiative here in Massachusetts that Mass DEP launched in 2018 after the impact of China National Sword policy became apparent. The goal is to help Massachusetts residents improve their recycling habits by getting the word out about what items belong in the recycling bin and which ones don't. The whole initiative is really based around what we call the Smart Recycling Guide. At the beginning of this process, we sat down with all the material recovery facilities in the state to come up with this plan. It wasn't easy to get all of these recycling facilities in the same room, given that they are competitors, but in the end, everyone agreed. We had to do something to make recycling a little easier for people. How? Have the same rules in each community across Massachusetts. So here's the Smart Recycling Guide, our go-to reference for recycling regardless of where you live, work, or play in Massachusetts. For a material to be included here, it had to have an actual viable market. The recycling facilities had to have the equipment to sort this material in order to bale it and bring it to market. And the material couldn't be a safety risk for workers. After going through pretty much every recyclable material you can think of, one by one, we landed on this list: metal food and beverage cans, plastic bottles, jars, jugs, and tubs, glass bottles and jars, and paper and cardboard. The bottom, with only 5 pictures, you may have guessed, is not a comprehensive list of no's. There are millions of products out there, and listing them all would require an extremely large guide that no one would take the time to look at, yet alone read. The design is intentional. These are the top 5 headaches at the folks at the recycling facility because they either shut down equipment, decrease the value of other recyclables, or harm workers. For example, what we have here at the bottom right, tanglers. This is what those hoses, chains, and film plastic look like at the recycling facility. They tangle themselves up in the sorting screen, hence the name tangler, and everything shuts down. It's then someone's job to climb into this equipment, cut these items loose. It's a dangerous job. It also means that recyclables are not getting processed the whole time this is happening. So you may be wondering, what's the big deal? Just tell people hoses aren't recyclable. Problem solved. Well, the challenge is they say you have to acknowledge you have a problem before you can address it. According to our market research, most people don't know they have a problem when it comes to recycling. They've been recycling for years. They know how to recycle. Despite the fact that 77% of Massachusetts residents felt that they know what belongs in their household recycling bin, 8 out of 10 thought that plastic with any number on it could be recycled. Yikes. We realized that we had our work cut out for us. So here's how we've been tackling this challenge. This is our secret sauce based on the last several years of working with the marketing wizards, learning about behavior change, and through a whole lot of trial and error. I've summarized these lessons into 6 overarching themes. Get to your point fast, show, don't tell, know your audience, remove the hurdles, ask for help, and iterate, iterate, iterate. So let me get to my first point. 8 seconds. This is the average attention span today. That means any educational campaign about recycling behavior, we need to get to the point and fast. So here's our most important message with Recycle Smart. Do not bag your recyclables. When we asked the material recovery facilities if they could share just one message, what would make the biggest difference to improving the quality of the recycling stream? The answer, do not bag your recyclables. You don't need to be overly creative. You just need to get to your point clearly and concisely. In Chip and Dan Heath's book, Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard, they say what looks like resistance is often a lack of clarity. So make it crystal clear what you're asking your residents to do. Don't just tell them to recycle smart, tell them how. Go ahead, get emotional already. Studies show that people rely on emotions rather than information to make decisions. Capture your residents' attention by sharing something surprising or that sparks joy, like this video of ferrets playing in packaging peanuts. This was one of the most shared posts on Recycle Smart's Facebook page, reminding folks that the packaging peanuts do not belong in the recycling bin, but many pack and ship stores will accept them for reuse. We've all probably heard the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. Well, that may work for selling newspapers, but researchers who have analyzed word-of-mouth communications found that people are more likely to share positive news, not negative news. It's similar to the concept of a social smile. If you smile at a baby, the baby will instinctively smile back. As humans, we crave novelty. We like things that are out of the ordinary or unexpected, like this sign that uses humor to remind dog owners to pick up after their pet. How much more likely are you to read this sign than, say, this one? How can you use humor to capture your residents' attention and get them to actually read your recycling signs and banners? You may be wondering, is there a place for negative messages? It ends up that negative or loss-framed messages work best to motivate people to action when you pair it with clear instructions, like this idea that garden hoses are not recyclable. On the other hand, if you are trying to motivate a larger, more abstract, less immediate behavior, like recycling in general, that's where positive messages or gain-framed messages are best to use, like this image we created for social media about recycling a ton of paper, saving 15 trees. Tip number 2, show, don't tell. As humans, we are very visual. As you can see from this infographic here, 70% of all of your sensory receptors are in your eyes, which is pretty neat. We can process the things that we see in a picture, a video, or even these infographics a whole lot faster than we can if we only heard or read about the exact same content. Which is why they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. This graphic summarizes the findings from a clinical trial published in the Journal of Patient Education and Counseling, where the researchers looked at whether or not incorporating pictograms on medicine labels influenced patient understanding and adherence. Ends up, yes, patients were more likely to understand and adhere to the instructions on medicine labels with a pictogram included. Does this concept seem eerily familiar to you? It should, because it's exactly what we did with the Smart Recycling Guide. You'll notice that this guide pairs images and text. Why do images make such a difference? Well, let me give you an example. You may call this thing on the left a soda can, but I'm from Michigan, so that is a pop can. When we look at a picture, we both know what we're talking about though. Plus, a picture goes a lot further when you're trying to reach a diverse audience where English may not be someone's first language, whether or not you have actually translated the words. So if a picture is worth 1,000 words, what about a video? Well, it ends up that people have calculated this. A 1-minute video is said to be worth 1.8 million words. Our eyes are attracted to movement, so videos naturally draw in people's attention. They are pretty good at keeping our attention too. Ends up, marketers crunched the numbers and found that people are over 27 times more likely to click on an online video ad than a static banner ad, and that videos get 1,200% more shares than text and images combined. And the online video trend is showing no signs of stopping. It is estimated that the average person will spend 100 minutes every day watching online videos in 2021. That's a lot. A good tip for those of you who don't have millions of dollars or the time to spend making your own videos, you can make a video like the one that I just showed, where we showed folks what type of takeout containers are recyclables and which ones are not, pretty easily. You just take a series of static images, add a text overlay, and animate the images with Adobe or one of the many free video making apps available online. And we would be remiss not to mention the power of storytelling and how it can shape our behavior. Stories are how we understand and make sense of the world around us. They can help us understand different perspectives, explore alternative realities, and better retain information. By activating multiple parts of our brains and eliciting a physiological response, such as the release of chemicals, cortisol, oxytocin, and dopamine, anyone hoping to motivate others to change their behavior should add storytelling to their education and outreach toolbox. Which is where at Recycle Smart, our monthly newsletter comes into play. In the latest newsletter, recyclers met Mo. Well, his real name is Ed, but Ed Says No just didn't have quite the same ring to it. Anyways, in the feature article last month, Mo told us about his day as a plant manager at one of our material recovery facilities here in Massachusetts. He walked us through his morning, which starts at 4:30 in the morning, by the way, up until the last machine is shut off at 12:30 a.m. the next day. Don't worry, he's not there the whole time. They do have shifts. He helped give a new perspective to recyclers about how much it matters what items they put into the recycling bin. Imagine if crawling into that large sorting screen to remove plastic bags was part of your job. And you know what? After his story went out, Ed shared this piece with his wife, and she actually learned something new about what happens at the facility. It's funny how our spouses often know so little about what we actually do at work. Tip 3. Know your audience. Even in a very small community, there is a wide range of preferences, perspectives, knowledge, and attitudes among residents, which influence to what extent a particular message will reach and resonate with folks. In marketing, there's this concept of audience segmentation, or tailoring your message to reach smaller, more homogeneous subgroups of your target audience based on criteria that they all share, such as which platforms people use to get their news, demographics, similar interests, similar behaviors, etc. One helpful way to think about knowing your audience is thinking about how your educational efforts fit through this lens of what our friends at the Recycling Partnership call the information hierarchy. If you want or need your message to reach the most amount of people, focus on one simple message, like Recycle Smart, this is do not bag your recyclables. This is what we would put on a billboard, banners, or radio PSA. Some folks may want to get to know a little bit more, which is great. So we send everyone the Smart Recycling Guide in the mail to let them know what is and isn't recyclable. And then a small handful of people, what we lovingly call our alpha recyclers, in which I include myself, and I'm assuming most of you are falling into that camp as well. Well, we want it all. If you are a recycling nut like me, the more information, the better. This is where our Recyclopedia search tool comes into play. The Recyclopedia is a searchable database of hundreds of items that lets people know exactly what to do with those wine corks or pizza boxes. The problem is that when we are educating residents, assuming that everyone else is like us and that our residents want to know all there is about recycling leads to us designing overwhelming and ineffective educational campaigns. Think about banners crammed with so much text that you have to wear reading glasses to see, or websites with a mile-long list of materials, which bins they go in, why they go there, and the history of recycling dating back to caveman era. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get my point. With Recycle Smart, we realized we can't afford to reach only our fellow recycling enthusiasts, and I hope that when you think through your next recycling campaign, using the information hierarchy in mind, you'll realize it's time to stop preaching exclusively to the choir. Another great way to know your audience is to figure out where they look for recycling information. In a recent survey conducted by the Recycling Partnership, they found that most residents look for recycling information online. This echoes what we found in our own statewide recycling participation study in 2015. We saw that the internet is a go-to resource for recycling information, with nearly half of participants indicating that they looked at their town website, state website, or internet search. But there's also a significant number of Bay Staters tuning into town-supplied information, such as a brochure, or even directly calling their town with their pressing recycling questions. And since we know that people look for their recycling information in various places, it's important to get the message out using several different mediums. Doing so not only ensures your message reaches more residents' eyeballs, it also has the added impact of aligning what they call effective frequency in marketing. With our Recycling IQ Kit program, we encourage communities to focus on one message for a limited time, such as do not bag recyclables if you're seeing a theme here. They make sure that the message is everywhere a resident may be, a pop-up banner at town hall, a billboard in town, directly mailing it to residents' house, on a hanger tag, or on the recycling bin, or even at the soccer field. The idea here is that a person needs to see the same message a certain number of times before they really hear and respond to it. What the exact number of times is up for debate. The most popular is the rule of 7. In psychology, they call this the mere exposure effect. Essentially, that familiarity leads to preference for a thing, idea, or a message. So don't worry too much about for repeating yourself or feeling like you're nagging. Repetition creates familiarity, which creates preference for your message. What motivates people? Another way to know your audience is to understand what motivates them. Here are the top 5 reasons Americans recycle. Concern for future generations, both in terms of ensuring an inhabitable Earth and a better place, preserving natural resources, reducing carbon emissions, and minimizing accumulation in landfills. Are your recycling messages hitting on all of these motivators? Asked a slightly different way in our statewide recycling participation research, we wanted to know what was the best argument for being more careful about what you put in the recycling bin. In the end, municipal costs increasing and worker safety hazards were the winners. If you don't have the time or money to do a marketing research study, don't worry. You can start by just talking to the people in your community to better understand what they care about. You can do a quick online poll on your social media account, or you can simply just keep testing new messages and see what sticks. Tap into local pride. This is Jocko. He's a 6-foot bispectacle parrot who is on display at the Mascot Hall of Fame. Yes, this is a real thing. It's located in Whitting, Indiana, just outside of Chicago, in case you want to plan your next trip. Jocko is not just any parrot. He's a St. Lucia parrot, and he is part of the story of how this species that was seemingly doomed to extinction made an incredible comeback. The St. Lucian parrot's population has increased 400% since the late 1970s and remains steady decades later. The secret ingredient? Pride. At the time when he first visited the island, Paul Butler was a recent graduate working with a shoestring budget that would have led most folks to raise up their hands in defeat. He was tasked with a pretty big mission: help revive the parrot's population. How did he do it? He tapped into local pride. He helped St. Lucians understand that this parrot was theirs. It's something that no one else on Earth has. They should take pride and protect it. Now the St. Lucian parrot is the national bird of the island and an inspiration for pride campaigns taking place across the world to help conserve endangered species. How can you tap into local pride? Here in Massachusetts, we regularly highlight our municipalities, our schools, our community groups, our universities, and our businesses that are embodying what it means to be a smart recycler. We are shifting away from the idea of being people who recycle correctly, which is a behavior, to people who are smart recyclers, which is an identity. It's part of what makes us proud to be Bay Staters. Tip 4, remove the hurdles. We are quick to look at people not recycling incorrectly, or not following instructions and assume that they do not care or they are lazy. But is there any chance that we've unintentionally put up barriers to the behaviors we are hoping for? How can we make it easy, or at least easier? I love this quote from Chip and Dan Heath. If you want people to change, you can provide clear direction or boost their motivation and determination. Alternatively, you can simply make the journey easier. Create a steep downhill slope and give them a push. Small tweaks to the physical environment are often all you need to change behavior. For example, if your goal is to decrease the use of single-use plastics in your community, simply have local restaurants only provide straws upon request instead of as the default. It ends up that most people won't even think to ask for a straw to drink a cup of water, but would use it if provided by a waiter or a waitress. Or, I bet you know just by looking at this picture which container here is for recycling and which one is for trash, even without seeing the labels. Simply changing the color of the containers and the shape of the openings on the lid can increase both the quality and quantity of recycling. Make it accessible. We've talked about this a couple times, but one of the major hurdles to recycling is that messages are either hard to find, unclear, or inconsistent among many of your resources. The best way to know if your recycling information is clear and accessible, ask an outsider. Someone who doesn't know all the recycling industry jargon, or is visiting your recycling center for the very first time, or just moved to town and trying to navigate your website to find out what's recyclable. It can be incredibly insightful. I bet many of us here are guilty of using one or more of these terms: commingled recycling, single stream recycling, or zero sort recycling when talking to the public. These are the results again from our statewide recycling participation research. You will notice a lot of this medium blue on the left indicating that people are not sure what these terms mean. More alarming, the green bars indicate that a pretty large number of people feel that these terms mean mixing trash and recyclables together, which begs the question, when we use vocab like single stream recycling, are we unintentionally encouraging contamination? This is a good example of how industry jargon creeps into our websites, our social posts, and even signage at the transfer station and can get us into trouble. I'm going to tell you a story about my parents who recently bought a lake house in northern Michigan. Mom and Dad had been burning their leaves in the backyard fire pit until their neighbor came over and told them about how the local transfer station has yard waste pile. So they hopped in the truck, piled the leaves in the back, and headed to the transfer station. Keep in mind that they are used to curbside recycling and a transfer station is a whole new world for them. Anyways, when they got there, they kept seeing all of these signs posted on the containers that said no dumping. There was a yard waste bin right there, but they didn't know that that's where the leaves went because there was no one there to take the time to ask, and they assumed that no dumping signs meant that they couldn't dump anything into the container. So they drove home with the leaves still in the back of the truck. Are your signs unintentionally confusing people? At Recycle Smart, we are always thinking about this when we're designing messages. We make sure to say recycling facility rather than MRF and avoid things like single stream in our messages. We also often ask someone who's less close to recycling world, yes, sometimes it's our significant others or family members, to help vet our messaging beforehand. Remember how we found that people think they are better recyclers than they are? Whenever possible, providing direct feedback is a great way to reach people who think they know how to recycle, but actually don't. A precursor to the Recycle Smart program in Massachusetts, we had and still have our Recycling IQ Kit program, which is a toolkit for municipalities to provide direct feedback to residents on their recycling behaviors. In curbside communities, this includes tagging contaminated bins with a note about what items shouldn't go in the bin. The bins are not picked up until residents remove the plastic bags, the hose, or in some cases, the wheelchair. Yes, we've seen a wheelchair crammed in a recycling cart. At the recycling drop-off center, direct feedback comes from the form of having volunteers or staff directly interact with the recyclers and show them how to sort the materials. This idea of direct feedback can even be accomplished online. For example, we recently launched a Recycle Smart quiz where people can get immediate feedback. Scrap metal is a big issue in curbside recycling programs. When people are asked which of these metal items is recyclable in your recycling bin, if they select tanks, hangers, or pipes, they will get this message. Oops. If they get it correct, they will get the same reason why scrap metal doesn't belong in the bin, but the instant feedback that they were correct. Are there ways that you could provide direct feedback to your residents? Tip 5, ask for help. My husband will attest to this, but asking for help is not always my strong suit. But when it comes to your recycling education and outreach efforts, it's pretty important. You likely have a dedicated audience, those folks that will call the town, go to your website, subscribe to a newsletter if you have one, or even the select few who have your direct email and phone and will use you as your personal on-call recycling guru. But what about everyone else? Tap into your local influencers. Ask the movers and shakers in your town to help spread your message. At Recycle Smart, we have a partnership program where hundreds of municipalities, nonprofits, businesses, and community groups are helping spread the word about smart recycling. We regularly feature partners in our newsletter and on our website in this partner spotlight section to give kudos to and thanks to the organizations going above and beyond to share the Recycle Smart message and provide inspiration for the other organizations looking for their next good idea. And on those days when you are feeling a little shy and you don't want to ask for help, don't worry. You can also simply just look for help. In the social media world, they differentiate content creation and content curation. So content creation is where you make your own content like videos or you take your own photos, where content curation is where you find and share content that was already created from other resources. At Recycle Smart, a large part of what we do is content curation. We are constantly reminding ourselves that we don't need to recreate the wheel. Often, someone else has already created that video that we have playing in our heads. There are many great resources out there already. You are always welcome to share any of the Recycle Smart material, but you can also check out these other excellent resources like Vermont's Recycle Like You Live Here campaign, Recycle CT, which is actually the original inspiration for Recycle Smart, and of course NRRA, which is why you're all here today. So tip 6, iterate, iterate, iterate. As someone trained in the sciences, I couldn't not mention data. Measuring data like participation rate, annual tonnage, and inbound contamination rates are great ways to determine the effectiveness of your outreach and evaluate progress over time. Here you see the results of one of our Recycling IQ Kit communities, Needham. Before running the IQ Kit program, they had a contamination rate of 28%. After, it dropped down to 14%. The program clearly worked. Using data is even easier on social media. For example, we regularly look at the analytic reports for our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram account, as well as the website to see what is working and what isn't. Here you will see that this video explaining how to appropriately dispose of film plastic was the top shared post in a given month. How do we use this data? We look for patterns in topics, content type, or tone that give us insight into what messages are resonating well. After seeing that this video was shared 150 times, we prioritized sharing more information about film plastic recycling and created more of these videos with text overlays. And if you only remember one thing today, it's to experiment and to see what works and what doesn't. By looking at your data points, whatever they are, you will be able to tell what messages are resonating and inspiring residents to change their behavior, what ideas are catching on and what aren't. Here are some of our experiments. We've been playing around with different types of graphics, like this image of a text message conversation. The first draft of this graphic didn't include a reason why the necklaces can't be recycled. But more and more, we are seeing that our Recycle Smart audience wants to not just know if something is recyclable or not, but why. And they are interested in alternative solutions for harder to recycle items. Some may be even willing to take back the plastic bags to the grocery store or collect and send in their wine corks. We're also experimenting with identifying cultural trends. Like the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, more people were using delivery services, so we wanted to make sure to share content that was relevant to that idea, letting people know what to do with all this increased package showing up at their doorsteps from their online orders. And right now, we're trying out our very first Recycle Smart photo challenge. We noticed that many people were responding well to our posts about pets helping clean out recyclables, so what better way to create more buzz and engagement around being a smart recycler than to invite our favorite four-legged friends into the mix. And that's all I have for you today. Thanks for sticking with me all the way into the end. I'm sending all of you a virtual high five or an elbow bump if you prefer. I hope that you have learned a few good tips and tricks that you can take with you on your recycling education journey. But before I open up for questions, I want to leave you with a challenge. We know there's a difference between knowing how to act and being motivated to act. But when it comes time to change the behavior of other people, our first instinct is to teach them something. How can we push past this instinct to just provide recycling information for residents and choose instead to tap into what we know about what motivates behavior change? We often assume that the pattern of changing is to analyze, think, and then change, but it's not. We see, feel, and then change. I personally feel inspired when I look at using behavior change insights to shape our recycling and education efforts. I hope that you're leaving today with a few good tools in your toolbox that you now know that it's important to get to your point fast, show, don't tell, know your audience, remove the hurdles, ask for help, and iterate, iterate, iterate. Together, let's take our recycling education and outreach efforts to the next level. And at that, I'd like to encourage you to follow Recycle Smart on social media platforms that you use and sign up for our monthly newsletter at recyclesmartma.org. And I will now open it up for questions or any comments that you have.
Erin, we have a couple of questions come in. The first, it says, it looks like many of your educational materials are geared toward curbside single stream pickup. Do you have any targeted materials for communities that bring the recycling to their local transfer station?
Yes, that is a great question. And that is partly why I tried to talk about high-level behavior change insights here so that it can be applied to transfer station communities. We do have transfer station communities that are using our Recycling IQ kit materials. And when we do design things, we intentionally make sure we try to avoid the phrase curbside, and we try to avoid the the idea of carts so that we're more inclusive of different types of programs in Massachusetts, but most of our communities in Massachusetts are curbside. So if you go, I didn't mention this, but on recyclesmartma.org, we have a resource tab that we just added, and there are tons of resources that can be downloaded and anyone can use. They're all open source. They can all be customized. We have all of the, if you want a certain file, like the graphic image, we're happy to provide them. And I would just look for we noticed that drop-off communities tend to have different contamination issues. It might be that you try to separate newspaper print as a separate source stream, and you're having a lot of newspaper ending up into a cardboard container or something like that. And so it's just going to be choosing the right message to get out there. And we do talk about some of those things on our social media and our website.
Excellent. We have another question about that came in before the webinar about how to reach multifamily dwellings with lots of turnover or language barriers, and how to combine. I think you talked a little bit about how to combine education with enforcement of those.
Yes, that's a super good question and a very tricky subject. We've been working with our Recycling Works group recently to try to address this issue because multifamily units are a huge challenge. So we recently put out a training about Recycle Smart and our waste bans in Massachusetts that was intended for property managers. But if I can highlight some of the biggest takeaways where it really depends because property managers, like our properties can look so different. One, I would say images go further than just text because of any language barriers. The other thing is to get to residents right when they move in like a move-in packet. Is there an easy guide for what belongs and what doesn't? Do you do a tour of the recycling, or do the property managers do a tour of the recycling areas and explain what goes where, like right when you move in? Are they putting out that information regularly in newsletters? So we've been trying to get more property managers in Massachusetts to sign up for Recycle Smart and to share that content with their residents. So
excellent.
Hopefully that helps a little bit. You can learn more if you want to on Recycling Works webpage. We have the link to the full recording of the property manager training that we gave last month.
Excellent. That's a good question. Could you go back to the slide of the 5 takeaway points again? We have a request for that.
Sure.
And to go along with that slide, there's a question that comes in, saying there's so many great resources here for a community who has done basically none of this. What's the easiest first step to take? Would you go starting with your number 1 point?
Yes. I was a little worried about that. I don't want to overwhelm anyone. I would say that the first is to just audit any materials you do have out there and make sure that they all say the same thing. One of the issues that we constantly have or run into is that people might be working off of outdated brochures, outdated materials. And to make sure your website is accessible, we encourage folks to in Massachusetts to put up the Smart Recycling Guide kind of as like the first thing on the recycling page. And then we actually enable people to embed the Recyclopedia widget, which is the thing that allows you to search all of the other items directly below that so that they don't have to worry about updating the list of what's acceptable and what's not. They'd add that right into their web page. So yeah, since most people go online to search for information, I would first check your website and any brochures you send out and make sure that those are up to snuff.
Yep. Easier to change a website or social media than it is a sign.
That is true. Yep.
We have a question in saying, recently launched social media in the town of West Hartford in Connecticut. How frequently have you found that it's helpful to post? This is a good one. I
That
have started Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I don't want to overwhelm.
Yes, we post 3 times a week. That is what our marketing gurus have told us is the magic number. I think that some people post more on, I think Twitter is a platform where you can't overwhelm. It's so quick and fast paced that you could post as much as you want. But for Facebook and Instagram, I'd start with that. I've heard from marketing folks that the more important thing is to be consistent. So if 3 is too much, go ahead and just aim for 2 a week or 1 a week, but be consistent with it if you can. And then I would also say that, yeah, social is a pretty fast-paced world. I wouldn't worry too much about overwhelming people with information. We are now connected to social media all the time. So yeah, hopefully that helps a little bit. There's
Excellent.
also really great tools online that help you figure out when they'll look at your audience and figure out when the best time to share it is, because people are more likely to be online, which is kind of neat. And we do take the same content and post it on all 3 platforms,
I was going to
Facebook,
ask that.
Instagram, and Twitter. And we just have to tweak Twitter because there's less character limits, and you can add more like hashtags into Facebook. So that's really the only, we don't make new content for each type of platform.
Right. Okay, we have a question coming in. Do you have experience using the Recycling Partnerships Social Media Toolkit? If so, can you talk about that resource? I know a little bit about it.
I have. We have downloaded it, and we have shared a couple of their posts that we thought were creative and great. And so, yeah, just as full background, I think they have 2 or 3 of these toolkits out now, and essentially you download a folder, and it has a bunch of images, and then it has a bunch of accompanied like sample text that you can use. So instead of having to recreate your own social ideas, you could use that for some inspiration.
Right. And the last question I have in so far is, in terms of behavior change, I've heard that face-to-face interaction is the best. Do you suggest training volunteers to make sure messages are consistent and smiling, helpful attitude rather than a shaming one?
Yes, definitely. I have my own experience. I actually used to work in the city of Durham, North Carolina, and we had, I'll just tell you a quick story. We had these food truck rodeos where we'd have hundreds of food trucks and we'd have thousands of people come by, and we were trying to encourage people to recycle and compost correctly. And so we would train volunteers so that they knew exactly what was recyclable and what was not. And then we would station them in front of the waste stations where they would pair the trash, the recycling, and the composting. And that was met, and those volunteers would help people figure out what goes in which bin, and people were so receptive of that. There were a lot of good conversations that started because of it. People really appreciated it because they just didn't know where everything went. They were overwhelmed.
Right.
So yeah, the making sure everyone's on a consistent message and being helpful, I think, is a really great approach for residents. And then I would also say, make sure anybody who answers your phones knows about the same message. Like if you have a 311 or some sort of service like that, having them know what's recyclable or what's not, or at least where to find it, that's really helpful as well.
Excellent. And lastly, I have a comment coming in asking how many staff you have working on your Recycle Smart Massachusetts effort. You set a gold standard.
Oh, why, thank you. So full disclosure, we do have a marketing firm that helps with us. There was a while where I was making all of the content and it was quite exhausting. So I do totally get that this is something that, you know, if you have 10 hats that you're wearing is not going to be easy to do that. And that's why I wanted to share that idea of sharing you don't have to create all the content. So we're fortunate to have a marketing team that helps us with it. But in-house at Mass DEP, I am the project lead. I have my boss who is pretty actively involved in it, who is our chief, our branch chief. And then there's one other person that we just hired on our team who is taking a pretty big role in the project as well now. So
Right.
it's not, it's not a light lift at times.
Right. Excellent. We have another question rolling in. How do you manage the Ooops tags? We rely on our hauler to give residents a customer education tag. In our town of 64,000, at most they issue 9, CE tags, customer education tags, a day. Do you incentivize haulers to Ooops tag? This is a hurdle for West Hartford. Obviously, contaminated bins are picked up.
Yeah, we've had many communities implement our Recycling IQ Kit point program at this point, because we're on I believe the 4th year of the program, and each community looks a little bit different in terms of the hauler's involvement. How we do it is we actually give a grant to the municipality that allows them to hire part-time staff, which is normally like students or just really dedicated recycle gurus in the community, to go on the worst routes in the community where you see a lot of contamination, and tag all of the bins before the hauler comes through, and you like turn the cart handle so that the hauler knows which bins to skip. But many of the communities also then work with the haulers to kind of do that tagging on their own, because it's very labor intensive and costly essentially to hire staff to do that, like on the ground tagging, but it pays off. It really makes a difference if you can do the program. All of that's available online if you want to see how the nuts and bolts of how it works. But the haulers doing it occasionally and sporadically is a good kind of like reminder, like keeping up in like the times where you're not having as much boots on the ground activity, but it's probably not sufficient on its own.
Right. Wow.
I hope that helps somewhat.
Yeah. Well, thank you for answering all those questions. Could you skip to the last 2 slides, please?
Of course.
I want to thank you, Erin, for such an informative presentation. I know I learned a lot today. I wanted to thank our sponsors for our program, the USDA, Schnitzer, and Interstate Refrigerant Recovery, Inc., for helping sponsor this. There will be a survey that will launch immediately after the webinar ends. It'll also appear in your email as a reminder if you're not able to take the survey immediately. We welcome feedback, and also just know that if you wish a certificate of attendance from NRRA, you need to take this survey. It's required. Next slide, please. Next week we have a break for the 4th of July week, and then the week of Wednesday, July 8th at 9 a.m. we'll have Tara Albert join us for best management practices for managing e-waste in New Hampshire transfer stations. And then on Friday, July 10th from noon to 1, we'll have a presentation on refill, not landfill. Co-presenters Mark Morgan and Emily Rogers. I'll be talking about their programs up in Lebanon and Hanover. And I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Please register for future webinars during the summer, and please share this on social media, as we just learned this morning, with your colleagues. Thank you, and have a happy summer from NRRA.
Thanks, everyone.